So I'd like to get to the Fed again. There's been a lot of talk about money printing, and when the Fed, quote, prints money, actually a lot of that is just digital money, not physical cash, and it seems they simply trade their existing inventory of Treasury and MBS securities for cash. So how does this benefit the banks? What is the subsidy here?
Well, it does not benefit us. It does not get out into the real money supply. It just goes onto the reserve accounts of banks. It's not. They can use that as collateral for speculating in derivatives, apparently, but all that's a bit shady. The whole shadow banking system is, by definition, in the shadows. So really, it helps the government because half of their quantitative easing currently is to buy government securities, which means the Fed rebates the interest to the government, so they're basically borrowing interest-free, and it does allow, it means it doesn't matter who else is selling securities because the Fed will just buy up the difference. And the mortgage-backed securities, supposedly that lowers the interest rate for long-term, like 30-year fixed rate mortgages, but it's not clear that it's had that effect.
Well, certainly we've seen a spike in interest rates recently due to this tapering talk. But I want to continue talking about the monetary base because there is a distinction to be made between the monetary base, that is the actual cash that's printed or digital cash, and the money supply. Now, when we're talking about the money supply, that includes our checking and savings accounts. So how does the money supply itself expand and lead to price inflation?
The money supply, actually right now we're in deflation. It may look like we're in inflationary times because due to interest and having to add profits, et cetera, onto their costs, manufacturers have to raise their prices. But it's not because there's too much money in the system. In fact, there is too little money in the system. The money supply has shrunk by $3 trillion since 2008. That's including the shadow banking system, which is where about half the credit in the system comes from. Sorry, what was I've forgotten your question.
No, that's okay, because I want to get into this a little bit more. Is it possible that we could get into a hyperinflationary scenario, and how could one be avoided while also liquidating the existing public debt? And, what about all these so-called unfunded liabilities?
No, we're not going into hyperinflation. Okay. We're in deflation. We're quite like Japan, which has been in a deflationary spiral for the last 20 years, even though they've been doing quantitative easing after quantitative easing. It's the same deal, where the money cannot jump that great divide between the reserve accounts of banks, which are held at the central bank, and the circulating money supply, where the money really needs to go in order to get some demand out there to actually get the whole thing moving again.
Sure. And what I was talking about was kind of a crisis of confidence in the U.S. dollar. And there has been a crisis of confidence, unfortunately, in Detroit because it's going bankrupt. And they filed for bankruptcy recently. It looks like the pension funds are going to take a major haircut. And this isn't dissimilar from what happened in Cyprus. So can you explain the concept of bail-ins as they relate to these examples? And what are we going to see in the future?
Well, in a bail-in, the little people bear the losses. The bank always wins. The deal is that the too big to fail banks must survive at all costs. So up till now, we've had bailouts, which is where the taxpayers have bailed out the banks. But governments are balking at bailing out banks anymore. And so we have cases like Cyprus where instead of, in that case, it would have been the ECB and it was the Troika, the ECB, the European Commission, and the IMF, that when these two big banks in Cyprus went bankrupt, they said, before you get a loan from us, you're going to have to bail in your creditors, which they start with the shareholders, and then they take the unsecured or the uninsured creditors, and then the insured, which means the depositors. It turns out that people's deposits are liabilities of the bank, and the that the people only have IOUs.
And real quick,
So,
what does this say for the U.S.? We have about 15 seconds left. Can we see this in the
okay,
U.S.?
so in the U.S., actually that's a template. We thought it just happened in Cyprus, but it's actually a template that started in 2011. It was set by the Financial Stability Board of the Bank for International Settlements. It's a requirement of all big banks now. They have to come up with these living wills where they say what they will do in the event of a big collapse. And the same thing's happening in Detroit, where they're taking the pension funds.
We have to cut this short, but that was fascinating. Thank you for joining me. This is Ellen Brown, author of The Public Bank Solution and Web of Debt.